Well, hello and welcome. Yesterday we left off talking about James' exhortation to keep a tight rein on our tongues. And when you think about that phrase, tight rein, you might think about basically the rein that's on a horse or even a leash that is sometimes used to lead an animal. The idea is that you keep the animal from having its own head, as they say. That you don't let the horse run when you don't want him to run, and you also are able to hold him back when you need to hold him back. But rather, he conforms himself to the pace of the rider. And in this case, we are the horse, God is the rider. And he's saying it's really important when it comes to the issue of our tongue that we let God train us to use our tongues in a way that's correct. That there are certain things that we don't want to say because they don't bring any good results. And sometimes when we're struggling with what we've talked about previously, the issue of anger, we can let our mouths just kind of shoot off and say things in anger that quite honestly may express our anger but may not express how we truly feel or even express the truth. And that's why more lies are told in anger than truth was ever expressed in anger. And so, be careful of justifying yourself, saying, "Well, I just had to say it; I couldn't help it." That's not really a positive or complimentary thing to say about yourself. It's the ability to speak with control and not lose your temper. There are things that can make us angry, but we need to bring that under submission to the Spirit. We need to walk in a bit of humility because really anything you get angry at somebody for doing, you've probably done it a dozen times as well, and maybe more, and never felt like you need to reprove yourself. So I just think that becomes one of the great hypocrisies. I see people who profess a great love for Christ, and yet they have a very angry, hateful attitude towards Christians and or even non-Christians. And that's so inconsistent that when we're talking in these daily devotions about becoming fully devoted followers, we really need to be studying how Jesus controlled his tongue. And have you ever noticed that when you read the gospel? I never see an incident of Jesus, even when he was angry, saying things that weren't true or were unfair or unjust. That is something that is human, and that's an area why we need to really focus on it. Because one of the things that Jesus said in Matthew 15 in this regard, he said, the things that come out of the mouth, that is, that come out of the heart, and these are the things that makes a man unclean. You see, the Jews were worried about what he ate, what he touched, all those kind of things. He said, those things won't make you unclean. What makes you unclean is what comes out of your mouth. Because he says, out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. In other words, there's a pathway that bad behaviors come down. I mean, they begin as a thought. They're followed by a statement. We usually express something, verbalize something, and then after we've verbalized it enough, we get encouraged or emboldened to act upon it. This is why, on one hand, in a positive sense, he says if we confess with our mouth that Christ is Lord, that's what we believe in our heart, then we'll be saved. So it's really, really important. Jesus says, if any man confess me before men, I'll confess him before my Father in heaven. So when we verbalize things that we're thinking, we bring a objectivity to them. We objectify them. They become solid. They become material in the sense that we are now committed to something that we're doing. This is why when you have a wedding ceremony, you have a vows where the couple expresses vows to each other, because the whole point is that they're verbally expressing a commitment to one another until death do them part. If somebody's up there and you say, "What would you repeat the vows?" and the groom or the bride says no, well, I know right away that this marriage isn't going forward. This wedding isn't going forward because we have a disaster on our hands. So we have to understand that our words carry weight with them. Now, I'm not suggesting like certain people of the Word Faith movement, the NRA and stuff like that, saying NAR, New Apostolic Reformation Group, those kind of what I think are kind of cultic, who basically say that your words are as powerful as God and you create with them. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. Most of us know that's not true. But the simple fact is that doesn't mean that my words don't mean anything. My words do have an effect. When I was a kid, we used to say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I learned that was absolutely not true. I know as a child that when my parents became angry at me, and sometimes they carried out their frustration with their own selves, their marriage and life in general, that the words that they would say to me when I irritated them were very hurtful. And I think even to this day, I carry a lot of that wounding with me. And so we need to understand that words are powerful things. We can't just toss them around in a cavalier way. I will often say it's almost like you carrying a loaded gun. That if you know anything about carrying a gun, one of the things you want to do is you never assume it's not loaded. You're always checking to make sure there's nothing in the chamber, because if it's in the chamber, you could accidentally set it off. And so some of us are going through life with we're kind of so angry or irritated, we're half cocked. We're just waiting for somebody to cross us. And so when somebody does, we blow them away with our words. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what happens. We blow people away with our words, and then eventually that can lead to fisticuffs and even guns and violences and knives. It always has its root in words that are spoken, words that later on people will say, I wish I had never said them. I wish I had just walked away. So these are important things again. But this is why the Bible speaks about the careful use of the tongue, the mouth, words. I mean, I think there's probably at least 1,000 different passages in the Old and New Testament telling us how powerful a source of good and evil the tongue is. Here's just a couple that I pulled up from Proverbs. In Proverbs 13:3, it says, he who guards his lip guards his life, but he who speaks rashly will come to ruin. Or in Proverbs 18:21, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Or in Proverbs 21:23, he says, he who guards his mouth and his tongue keeps himself from calamity. Or lastly, how about Proverbs 15:4, the tongue that brings healing is a tree of life, but a deceitful tongue crushes the spirit. Let's pray this week that God would give us tongues that bring healing, not that crush the spirit. And God hears our prayers. We'll talk about that later on when James tells us if we need wisdom, we can ask God and he'll give it to us in abundance. And so let's pray for that ability to wisely use our tongues so that we use them to bring healing into other people's lives and not to crush the spirit of others. God bless. Go in his grace.